Dear Mr. and Mrs. Black, I regret to inform you. Petunia Black leaned back in the chair of the telephone table against the green velvet curtain in the hallway of their small, suburban house, glanced at the two other letters that lay on the glass top before narrowing her eyes. She recognized both hands, one looped and neat, exact and sickeningly perfect. In contrast, the scrawl that had, against all odds, allowed the owl to deliver it all the way from a tiny Norwegian island made Petunia's defensiveness melt away, and she picked up Cecilia's letter, dropping the first that she had opened. Cecilia. She picked at the top before unfolding a slightly grubby and creased leaf, relaxing as she did so as she read her friend's letter. It was inexplicable that she and Cecilia had become friends all those years ago. The woman had literally turned up out of nowhere at the door of the reciprocators' headquarters, her brother-in-law Sirius's house. But it had been Cecilia's genuineness, her lack of pretense, her honesty even when she had made some blundering errors that others in the reciprocators had pounced on to beat her with, those things that had drawn Petunia to her and made her like the woman. That, and the fact that Cecilia regularly got up the noses of both her sister and Henrietta Edwards, of course. Petunia glanced sideways at the other letter, pristine and exact, the words put together thoughtfully and impeccably composed. What did she want that she thought Petunia could give her? Was it the fact that Henrietta had, according to several anonymous sources, been aiding dark wizards and conjurists, something which Petunia sensed had been the cause of her death? She looked back to the letter in her hand. 3 months out of date, and Cecilia's happiness and to hell with its attitude that may have poured off the page had the words been liquid that caused Petunia to smile. Cecilia had written of her reconciliation with Remus, and that now she had found a way to return to Britain, against the express wishes of her brother-in-law Callias Lupin. Her family meant so much to her, Petunia knew, that her love of them was interwoven with the twists and turns of the untidy handwriting of hers. It was the same feeling she, Petunia, felt for her own family, that deep yearning of worry, edginess and suppressed euphoria that sometimes made her laugh out loud when she was alone, or cry a few tears next to her sleeping Regulus if she were awake at night thinking about them. No matter how others thought of them, no matter how Lily thought of her nephews, she corrected herself. Many times, through her own life, when she had let them down unintentionally or sometimes because she had been so annoyed with her parents' constant negativity towards her on purpose, the reason for her inadequacies had been jealousy of her younger sister. And on the face of it, Petunia could understand why, of course. Her deep empathetic skill made her all too aware of her parents' feelings towards her, and their favoritism of Lily made it even worse. Petunia was the eldest, and as such, was expected, at least in their parents' eyes, to defer to Lily, to praise her for her magical ability, to put up with the taunts and bullying that she had encountered and endured at Hedgewood's. And there had been only one person to stand up for her then, against Henrietta Edwards' incitement of hatred at school, Regulus Black, whom she had followed on his leaving school, and never returned, much to her parents' chagrin. Not Lily, who to their folks, had claimed she had begged Henrietta to stop, but to no avail. Besides, it had been so often pointed out that Petunia was older, the implication being that she was either too weak in character or too stupid to do something about it herself. Yes, Petunia recalled, as she had followed the year group after their official leaving party, to Hogsmeade, and then had gone off with Regulus, her defender and confidant, whom Petunia had loved and still loved every bit as much every day, whom she had supported with all her heart in turn when he forged a career in magical architecture, before going freelance and securing employment for Dudley. Lily had never forgiven her flight. Their father had gone to search for her in a rainstorm, come home and died of a fever 3 days later, and her mother had lasted only another 3 months before she, too, had died. Lily had made funeral plans for their mum and had deliberately kept Petunia in the dark, cuttingly suggesting that Petunia's empathy should have meant she knew about them anyway. Why should Petunia have thought her little sister would have been any different about their mother's death than about anything that had gone on at school? She then spent every opportunity since the birth of her perfect sons making sure Petunia knew about each and every one of their successes, about James's success in the ministry, while, each time, asking in that oh-so-caring way, about any problems with Dudley and Daron, asking about Regulus's long hours and relatively low pay. And it was low pay. Not many wizards wanted new houses, less still for their defensive spells to be reinstalled. She glanced out of the window and at the large advertising sign on their front driveway. Need a spell to put them in hell? Want to hex 'em all the way to Wrexham? Buy a charm alarm from the nation's #1 magical architect Reggie Black. No job too big or too small. 25 years in the business. Petunia smiled. It was a job that he loved, something he was great at. And they managed, they always would, despite the opinion of any of those so-called reciprocators. Petunia looked again at the letter from Hedgewood's, posted as it had been through Royal Mail. Severus's diplomatically impeccable attention to detail. He knew how she clung to everything non-magical, everything perfectly non-wizard ordinary. Severus. Petunia had sensed early on that Severus Snape was going to achieve many great things, whether good or ill. They would be on a grand scale, proportional to his talents and considerable magical ability. She glanced at the letter from Lily again. Perhaps this would be the twin of the Hedgewoods' letter, consoling her about her son's misdemeanor, silently reminding Petunia of how much Lily valued her own son's spotless school records. She reached across and was about to shred it to pieces, but then stopped. It wasn't about Darren that Lily was writing, not Dudley and his newfound singledom out of the company of Freya Tunks, as the girl had become, much to Cecilia's sadness. As she opened and read the letter, deliberately discarding the envelope on the floor, Petunia couldn't resist a smirk of satisfaction. "Oh no, you," exclaimed Petunia loudly. "Nothing for you, eh?" She laughed aloud again. "But for Sam." Coward. Asking for help for Golden Boy Sam, who was to become the youngest intern the European Ministry had ever seen, who would also win every event at the Modern Magical Olympics while playing a fugue and conversing in English. Perfect Sam. But he needed tuition in empathy for his interview. Her project that she'd written all those years ago for general magical studies about empathy-strong witches and wizards in history, that has set her up for a hexing from the gang that night, led on by Henrietta Edwards. The one Petunia knew Lily knew she'd kept for all those years. So, she wanted her to send it to Sam at Hedgewood's. It was good, then, when Lily said it was good enough for her boy to help him on his career path. Where had her help been when Petunia had been punished for staying out of dorm all night, having been driven out one summer's evening by Miss Edwards? When had her perfect sister stuck her neck out for family? She would, Petunia thought, she would send the work to Sam. Of course she would. And Lily knew it too. Which is why the letter was now lying screwed up next to the envelope and being edged by Petunia with her foot to the open hearth and kicked into it. Of course she would send the work Sam. It wasn't Sam's fault she had a mother like that. There was a reason why she and Regulus had abstained from joining the reciprocators, despite Aberforth's relentless insistence that their skills would be valuable. A few reasons, Aberforth, Petunia added bitterly. The fire in the grate licked the paper hungrily as Petunia went back to the remaining 2 pieces of mail. Which next? Severus Snape's letter was for information only, and didn't require a reply, only an acknowledgement of receipt, which Petunia had already sent. And Cecilia's? 3 months out of date and therefore of no use to anyone, only as a snapshot in time of her friend's happiness that she and her husband has reconciled. Petunia turned, narrowing her eyes in the direction of the red brick-built fireplace. Remus. If Cecilia knew what she knew. What she suspected. The Cecilia then? Then their woman would find solace rather than frustrating isolation in that wretched school that farmed out bigots and snobs to impose more things on the country from a biased, unelected European Wizarding Council. She got up, looking around her already pristine house. Tomorrow, Petunia thought, with regard to her nephew's education. Tomorrow I'll find it out, or the day afterwards. Not today, she shouted silently at the now ashy letter and envelope. I've got far too much cleaning of the house to worry about before I try to find that out for you. 88,888,888. Coldness. Nothing like Cecilia had ever experienced, penetrated every crack and fissure, seeping through seemingly solid 3-foot walls as hot water through ice. She had taken to wearing all of her clothes at once now, only parting with her clothes for the castle elves to wash, dry, iron and fold, when they came to clamour for them of an evening, and only then allowing them access to her room once she had put herself under several quilt layers topped by a heavy skin, vowing to herself that she would not move even an inch all night lest the urgent, questing freeze would dart in the gaps and chill her. It was only October, Cecilia thought to herself as she threw her underlayers of clothes onto the floor by the door as she redressed by the furnace-like fire with her outer layers next to her skin. What would the cold be like in January and February? To say it was bitterly cold was an understatement, though it was one she had used in her covering letter to Cleus's office, accompanying her weighty tome describing the implementation of the laws from Strasbourg, the dissatisfaction and disquiet from the professors here at Durmstrang, the students' learning, Ragnhild's help to get around the building, and even the scores of the school's Quidditch matches that took place above the owlery. This would be her third winter at the school, and, as the door creaked open and a swoosh exactly like a castle elf diving for her laundry at lightning speed made her look over in the hope of seeing one of the little things, Cecilia wondered how she had borne the other two. The usual hard-nosed attitude of staff and students meant they simply carried on, as Cecilia had found out when she'd made an attempt to talk to Ragnhild about the matter. She'd told Cecilia to wear more clothes for, she'd said, in her usual matter-of-fact manner, that, there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. Clothing had indeed kept out the worst of the cold, but Cecilia did seem to feel the cold more than others at the school. And the thought of stopping at the school much longer and the tiredness and illness that plagued her from time to time was beginning to get her down. Snuggling down under her bedclothes, Cecilia waved her left hand clockwise, which allowed the air around her to glow. Not that she could perform much magic, of course, but that which she could do Cecilia found she was beginning to use without even thinking about it. Her mind drifted to her latest quantity of information that she had had the pleasure of dispatching to her brother-in-law. The research that Ragnhild was carrying out, into the red-headed gene, the mutterings and protests by several of the professors there at Durmstrang that they must share their work with other magical schools. More interesting than any of that was the page that had been discarded by the professor of Altifology, who gave lessons to the pupils in distance from the ocean and all manner of applications therein, who had discarded 2 pages of the Daily Prophet in disgust after he had received a sample of bogweed by Owl, declaring that this probably the one thing that was least connected to height, being a plant that was found deep in lakes and rivers. Cecilia had been walking along the corridor at the time, tailed by 12 fourth-year students who had finally pinned her down into giving them a lesson, and the sheets had floated in front of her and before her feet, and she had scooped and scrunched them up, pocketing them before finding them later that evening. Apart from the fact that it was clearly Professor Longbottom who had sent bogweed to the affronted Professor Anders Bow, and that had conjured up bittersweet memories of Hedgewoods as she recalled his honest, keen face, but the fact that she rediscovered them that evening as she was shedding some layers of clothing before replacing them with others had made Cecilia realize what she had got. Reading past the usual prophet bias, it was clear that there was a growing disquiet from several sections of the wizarding community and some non-wizards too, that the Hedgewoods' policy of admitting non-wizards had been a crazy experiment which had failed to do what Cleus Lupin had set out to do. Cecilia's mouth curled again in the darkness as it had done when she had read, and reread the columns. Unity had gone too far. It had said, in its edition a fortnight before, far beyond the natural boundaries that culturally separated the two peoples. So, thought Cecilia, a distant scream reached her through the thick castle walls. You haven't managed to charm the general public, brother dearest. Even though I believed it to be wrong, it took for you to implement it to prove to the whole country how wrong you were. Here, her thoughts were stopped, as another scream reached her. Ragnhild. The woman often screamed late at night. She had explained to Cecilia that the thoughts and feelings that she had about people, these were more attuned, clearer at night, like analog radio broadcasts without the heated atmosphere to have to pass through. All kinds of visions, Ragnhild had explained, and she closed her mind to the screams and thought instead about the witch's last conversation with Cecilia, telling her about the urge she always felt to prepare for the winter, to prepare against it, like an army under siege. Families far north traditionally spent the summer months hoarding food and wood, knitting, sewing, building. Here, where all was provided for staff but for Ragnhild, the mentality, the necessity, the physiological state of mind, was there. She had seen her hoarding food, stacking and piling bedding, boarding up her windows, even though all of her needs were met there at Durmstrang. Her mind drifted from her colleague to the thoughts that she had been pressing deep down inside herself since that afternoon, and the idea of Hedgewood's had popped up in her brain. Cecilia let go the damned emotion and the sadness and pining that she was feeling towards Septimus. The best she could hope for was that he wasn't missing her. That he was studying, sleeping, talking to his friends. Hopefully Septimus was putting his trust in the healers at St. Mungo's and not worrying himself unduly about his father. She had told him she would be back at Christmas, and now, she told herself boldly, she really didn't care about what Clea said, did or thought she would be. It was funny. Despite the bitterness and coldness, the strangeness within the castle and its chronic isolation in the tempestuous North Sea, thinking about her son, about Christmas and leaving all of this behind her made her feel a little happier. That there had been protests within the school here about sharing research, a more inward-looking, isolated place Cecilia didn't think existed, and to ask of them to share their work was like asking them to open up a vein. Their work was their lifeblood and they guarded it fiercely. Cecilia had, that evening, caught a conversation between the professor of magical history and the professor of dark arts studies concerning their official questioning of the validity of the requests being made. These official queries, which would be sent back to the European Council, would delay what was being asked of them by days if not months, while, as one, the wizards of Durmstrang dug and poked at every point. What a brilliant delaying tactic, Cecilia concluded. But she also knew it was unlikely to deter Draco Malfoy. Draco Malfoy. At once, the face that went with the name appeared in the darkness, and she thought about the boy she had known at Hogwarts. If she had been in a position to know then what she knew now, her view on the poor lad might have been different, for it was clear to Cecilia now that his circumstances had made for the pompous bully that he had been back then. Back there. But he didn't know her here. So few people did. In fact, the only person who probably remembered that she was at Durmstrang now anyway, the only person who truly cared for her feelings as she railed against returning there, was Severus Snape. Everyone else, the reciprocators, Callias, those staff she had worked with at Hedgewood's, Freya. Everyone was glad in one way or another, which she was out of the way. And then there was Remus. Unconscious, alone. Cecilia screwed up her eyes in the darkness to stop the racking sob that was about to leave her body making a sound. It was her irrelevance here, in this place, which had caused her to write about commonality in the first place, and all the other mistakes made by wizards. Her own bloody-mindedness had been her captor in this prison of a magic school. Had she been with the headmaster of Hedgewoods as he received the deadly accurate corrections to decades-long work she had sent to him, she would have been mildly amused at Severus Snape's expression. And then, to her own surprise, violent sobbing erupted from inside her as her son again impressed himself onto her hypothalamus. "Why can't I be the mum I want to be for you?" Cecilia screamed aloud, though no one would come to investigate, she knew. "Why can't I be the mum you deserve? To be the for you, to do what mums do," she continued silently, "take you back to Edgeford for a proper life, away from that school. Is it better to be away?" Cecilia turned over and punched her pillow, and then the mattress. "I'm too much of a coward to come for you again," she screamed into the cloth. And she was so close to throwing it all away again, all that work. She was back here again because she had done just that. Time passed. "Fight," Cecilia told herself at length, as the racking of her distress had caused her rib cage to ache and her eyes to sting. "Know thy enemy and fight." "But," said a little voice in her head, "what if the enemy was yourself?"